At 5:42 on 17 March 1945, Corporal Nolan Briggs is already invisible. He is folded into a granite fissure halfway up a steep, north-facing outcrop in the Black Forest. A rock crevice hide the size of a pantry, 18 inches of daylight across the mouth, 10 inches of room to shift, and 6 degrees of downhill sight to the trail below. The air tastes of iron and cold, the breath out of his mouth fogs in slow, patient white. Temperature reads 28 degrees F minus 2 degrees C. On the thermometer he is tucked against his thigh. A thin mist shrouds the furs. Visibility is inconsistent, between 150 and 200 yards in openings, less where the trees press together. Briggs's M1903A4 rests along his forearm. There is on the trigger guard a small bit of metal, a field-made tab he fitted in a winter lull. The men called it a gimmick. Officers once laughed, saying, "Briggs, you trying to improve God's rifle with barn parts." Enlisted men called it Briggs' toy. The taunts are a thin ribbon of sound from 4 months ago. Here their echo is irrelevant. The tab is more charm than science, a reminder that a toolmaker's hands never stop thinking. The documentary will not offer a manual. The scrap metal is a character detail, not a how-to. He feels the rifle's weight through leather gloves, the stock warmed by body heat, the barrel chilled to a toothache tingle. His fingers are numb at the tips, but the last degree of feeling lives in his trigger finger. He breathes in through his nose, counting slowly to 4, then out for 6. The forest is not quiet, it is watchful. Snow shears from a branch, a tiny avalanche of white that sounds like distant rain. A twig snaps at 112 yards, 3 men, moving low, moving together. Downslope 400 yards and out of earshot, his squad sleeps in a hollow, tents cuffed with snow, unaware. If the 3 that move now get around the slope, they can close the ring and bring the rest down in minutes. 14 Waffen-SS riflemen sweep the wood in overlapping lanes, not a frontal assault but a careful, practiced net. Their doctrine is to find the hole, pry it open, and let cold steel finish the work. That is how Briggs counts losses, in neat, ugly arithmetic. One flank moved, another covered, a trap closed. He tastes cordite from a warning shot an hour earlier. It still clings to the back of his throat like spent pepper. He smells pine resin, the damp wool of his coat, the iron tang of sweat drying against his collar. Closer, he hears the scrape of fabric on bark, a boot's soft slide on moss, the click of a safety being eased off. A man draws breath in the fog, and Briggs knows how that breath will look, a white cloud, then the dark of a face framed by a helmet. Numbers crowd his mind like a ledger, 18 inches of opening, 10 inches of movement. 6 degrees of sight, 1 crevice, 3 men approaching now, part of an encirclement party, 14 in the wider sweep. 5 seconds, the calculus tells him, 5 heartbeats to decide whether to stay still and be discovered, or to break the forest's hush with gunfire and risk the alert spreading like oil. He remembers the way the officers jeered in winter quarters. If your little barn tab does anything, we'll pin you a medal for tinkering. The memory arrives now as an irritant and a focus. Mockery has left a different tool, concentration. He does not think of glory. He thinks of the man in the hollow, Private Hargrove, 21, from Akron, who laughed when Briggs told a joke 2 nights before and who slept with his rifle across his knees. He thinks of how a ring closing could make all jokes sour. Outside the crevice, one of the riflemen pauses at a fallen log, the muzzle of his carabiner caught for a second in the willowy light. He angles 20 degrees from Briggs' line and pauses again, the exploratory step that shows a man trained to smell blood and fear. Another moves along the ridge, a shadow 10 yards farther, angling the sweep. The first man's boots grind like distant gravel. Briggs's pulse tightens. The silence is a drum. He counts backward, not aloud but with measured breaths. 5, feel the stock settle. 4, shoulder brace tight. 3, reticle finds a shape. 2, finger finds the tab. 1, squeeze. The shot is not heroic. It is clinical, a clean report, the brief flare of a muzzle, the soft metallic clatter of brass. The echo tumbles between trunks. Snow leaps from boughs in miniature avalanches. For an instant, everything in the valley tilts toward sound, cut to black. An echo hangs there, then nothing. In the next 40 seconds, everything will change. 7 targets, 1 ridge, and a contraption the army once mocked would become a whispered detail in the line tents below. Nolan Briggs came into the world on 22 October 1919, in a brick duplex on Elbert Street in Belden Village, Canton, Ohio. A neighborhood that smelled perpetually of coal soot and fried onions from the boarding houses. His father, Thomas Briggs, worked as a furnace tender at Republic Steel, a job that browned his face with heat even in midwinter. His mother, Anna, took in laundry, the steam from her wringer drifting out the back window like a permanent household ghost. Their world was not one of luxury but of constancy. Every morning before school, Nolan heard the far-off clatter of railcars and the furnace sirens that marked each shift. Children in Belden Village learned to understand steel long before they learned civics, temper, stress, fatigue, crack, failure. Nolan grew up absorbing these words until they were more familiar than Bible verses. He hunted with a .22 rifle that had belonged to an uncle killed in a factory accident. The rifle's stock was loose, the bolt stiff, and the iron sight slightly bent. In the hands of most teenagers it would have shot wide, but Nolan learned to adjust instinctively, aim an inch low at the hollow log, drift a hair right if the wind came from the west. One cold morning in 1933, he hit a rabbit at 43 yards, compensating unconsciously for the bent sight. His father, watching from 20 feet back, had said quietly, "Boy's got an eye like a plumb bob." It wasn't talent that defined Nolan, though, it was patience. He was the kind of kid who took apart broken egg beaters to see how springs worked, who filed down rust on abandoned tools just to see their true shape underneath. When a neighbor's Victrola jammed, Nolan opened it, studied its guts like a surgeon examining organs, and handed it back working better than before. People in Belden Village knew him as that Briggs kid who fixes things. He wasn't loud, he wasn't talkative, but he listened, always listened, and his quiet was mistaken for shyness when it was really concentration. He absorbed details like oil into cloth. The Depression taught him restraint. The mill taught him endurance. The town taught him that nobody hands out respect, you make it, layer by layer, like forged steel. By 16, with school feeling more like a luxury than a necessity, Nolan walked into Republic Steel with a lunch pail and asked for work. They put him on sweeping duty at first, pushing a broom along aisles that breathed heat like open ovens. But within months, a foreman noticed the way Nolan studied machines, the way others studied newspapers. He was transferred to the tool and die section, a place where exactness mattered more than muscle. Here the air smelled of graphite lubricant, cutting oil, and the faint electrical tang of metal filings under friction. Temperatures near the furnaces hit 120 degrees F, causing sweat to soak through shirts within minutes. Nolan didn't complain, he watched. He learned machining by repetition, cut, test, adjust, repeat. For 7 years, from 1935 to 1942, he tightened tolerances on lever systems, filed precision springs used in stamping machines, and measured surfaces to within thousandths of an inch. Work in the tool room required a steadiness of hand that factory floors rarely demanded. Old machinists said he had feel, a word they used sparingly. Feel meant knowing how a part should sit before measuring it, hearing a tool's hesitation before seeing why, recognizing the difference between good tension and dangerous tension just by flexing a spring between two fingers. He built calluses not from clumsy labor, but from the delicate grinding and polishing of parts no bigger than thumbnails. Hours at the bench tuned his muscles into a metronome, constant pressure, constant direction, constant awareness. It wasn't glamorous work, nobody applauded, but it forged his identity, quiet, methodical, unassuming. A man who solved problems without announcing them. Everything he learned, the patience, the calculation, the appreciation of a mechanism's smallest movements, lay dormant for now. In a few years, those same instincts would guide a decision officers laughed at, a decision that would matter on a cold German ridge. On 7 December 1941, at 1:20 p.m., the mill foreman turned down the radio and said, "Something else happened in Hawaii." Men gathered around the set, hats in hand, listening to the frantic broadcast, "Pearl Harbor bombed." Words crackled through the workshop, the kind that rearranged futures before anyone understood them. Nolan didn't throw his gloves down or make declarations. He simply nodded once, went back to his bench, finished the component he was machining, and washed his hands with industrial soap until they were raw. Then that evening he walked to the recruiting office on 3rd Street and filled out the enlistment forms without theatrics. On 14 December 1941, he became Private Nolan Briggs, United States Army. Basic training at Fort Benning surprised him, not the physical hardship that he expected but the noise. Sergeants barked from dawn to dusk, recruits shouted cadence until their throats burned. Nolan's quiet nature drew early comments. "Speak up, Ohio. Didn't know we were training ghosts here." But the silence that made him suspicious to drill sergeants earned him respect on the rifle range. During week 3 of training, wind gusted across the practice field at 17 miles per hour, kicking dust into men's eyes. Recruits cursed as their shots drifted wide. Nolan adjusted for wind automatically, letting the sight settle after each breath. His grouping stayed inside the mark. "Good shooting," Sergeant McCord muttered. "Creepy but good." He earned his first nickname a month later, Toolbox. During a weapons inspection, he noticed a loose rear sight on a Springfield. Nolan borrowed a scrap of metal from a broken crate hinge, shaped it with a file, and tightened the sight. Lieutenant Barnes scowled. "You're a soldier, not a machinist, Briggs. Leave mechanical fantasies to the armory." But when rifles jammed or sights rattled, soldiers called, "Toolbox, give it a look." They trusted what officers dismissed. By early 1943 he qualified as a marksman, then a sharpshooter, but paperwork delays, training cycles, and manpower needs kept him stateside longer than he expected. He trained, he polished rifles, he ran drills. He waited, the war felt far away, until 1944 brought changes none could ignore. In October 1944, Nolan was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, 15th Regiment, a unit battered by months of relentless combat moving across France. Replacement soldiers filtered in like spare parts in a machine running too hot. Nolan joined them quietly, duffel over his shoulder, grease pencil in his pocket from habit. Sergeant Earl McCluskey, a Wisconsin dairy farmer with hands like anvils, greeted him first. "You the quiet one?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Well, hell, we needed a quiet one. Too many talkers in this platoon." What? The squad was a tapestry of American labor. Private Hargrove, 21, from Akron factory floor joker. Private J.P. Royce, 24, Appalachian coal miner, could smell trouble like methane in a tunnel. Corporal Ames, former truck mechanic from Kansas City. They took to Nolan quickly. Soldiers didn't care about charm, they cared about competence. One night cleaning rifles in a barn near Metz, Royce examined Nolan's hands, scarred, burn-speckled, steady. "You're a toolman," he said. "Tool and die," Nolan corrected softly. "Close enough, you can fix this war for us maybe." It was mockery and admiration in equal measure. Officers remained wary. Lieutenant Barnes, transferred from his training battalion, found himself once again in charge of the quiet machinist. During one inspection, he pointed at Nolan's notepad, where rough sketches of mechanical concepts filled the margins. "You planning to invent something, Briggs?" "Just thinking, sir." "Don't think too much, we're here to fight, not tinker." But Nolan's thinking never stopped, it never had. Orders came in early December 1944, deployment. Nolan and his squad were sent to Camp Shanks, New York, the staging ground for thousands of soldiers soon to cross the Atlantic. From there, they boarded the USS General Buckner, a troop transport built for speed, not comfort. The crossing was rough, the Atlantic heaving under winter storms. Steel bunks clanged, men turned green. Nolan spent nights adjusting his gear, checking straps, running fingers over metal as if reminding himself what certainty felt like. They reached Le Havre, France on 16 December 1944, stepping into cold wind that smelled of ash, seawater, and diesel. The port was a skeletal landscape, bombed piers, half-sunken ships, cranes twisted like broken ribs. Moving inland, the 3rd Infantry Division joined the slow push through France toward the German border. Snow fell intermittently, coating vehicles in a thin crust. Nolan kept his rifle wrapped in oilcloth. At night he sketched quietly, ideas for a small tension assist tab on a trigger guard, inspired not by speed but by control. The idea wasn't a weapon, it was a comfort, a technical whisper from home. By February 1945, the division entered Germany. The landscape changed subtly. The forests grew darker, denser, more ancient. The wind crept between the trees in long, low sighs. The ground felt different beneath their boots, harder, colder, less forgiving. In March they advanced toward the Black Forest, where German resistance stiffened. Rumors circulated about Waffen-SS units, experienced fighters skilled in woodland maneuver. Nolan felt the tension in the air long before they saw the first snow-packed ridge. Every morning the men woke to frost-crusted blankets and breath pluming in the cold. Their boots stiffened overnight. Carbines needed constant care. The forest loomed around them, a maze of trunks and shadows. Yet even here, Nolan carried his quiet rituals. Every evening before bedding down, he checked the screws on his rifle, inspected the lenses, oiled the bolt. His squadmates teased him, toolbox polishing his toys again. "Leave him be," McCluskey said. "Man treats that rifle better than I treat my own wife." But officers didn't appreciate his innovations. When he produced a small metal tab he'd shaped from discarded equipment, Lieutenant Barnes shook his head. "You keep making little gadgets, Briggs, and someone'll think you're trying to rewrite the manual." Nolan only nodded. He wasn't trying to rewrite anything. He was trying to survive, and maybe help others survive too. The division moved deeper into the forest. Snow thickened. Branches sagged under weight. Visibility shifted with every gust of wind. Somewhere beyond the tree line, SS units watched and waited, and in his pack, wrapped in cloth to protect it from frost, Nolan carried the small, mocked scrap of metal he called simply the tab. He did not know then that within days, in a rock crevice on a cold German ridge, it would become the difference between life and death, not because it was revolutionary, not because it was miraculous, but because in a moment of closing danger, it allowed a quiet machinist from Ohio to act just a fraction faster than the men hunting him. And in war, sometimes a fraction was enough. The Black Forest in early 1945 was less a terrain feature and more a living obstacle, trees packed so tightly that daylight struggled down to the snow, visibility shifting from 50 yards to 5 without warning. The U.S. Army's doctrine in such places was straightforward on paper: advance aggressively, maintain pressure. But doctrine had been written far from these woods. Men like Corporal Nolan Briggs understood the real flaw. It wasn't courage or training or even ammunition. It was time, the mere seconds between shots. Standard rifle marksmanship, taught on open ranges under predictable conditions, assumed space to breathe, to correct, to reacquire. But here, where enemy fighters appeared and vanished behind trees as though the forest itself produced them, traditional rhythm faltered. A sniper might drop one target, but the second, already moving, already flanking, would vanish into cover in the heartbeat between shots. That heartbeat was killing Americans. Briggs saw it night after night. The cold stiffened fingers, gloves blunted sensation, the forest numbed circulation. Follow-up shots required subtle adjustments that human hands under stress and frostbite simply couldn't make quickly enough. Yet when he noted this in his field journal, he wrote only one sentence: recovery time is the weakness. The flaw haunted him because it wasn't theoretical. It was deadly, and he'd watched it take shape not as idea but as pattern, predictable, repeated, merciless. And it was just beginning. Private Samuel Sawyer Delmont, 19, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Sawyer Delmont had a smile too big for his face and a habit of humming when nervous. On 9 February 1945, during a sweep near the village of Bad Herrenalb, the squad spotted movement on a ridge. Briggs took a shot and hit the first SS rifleman. But the second man, partially obscured by spruce branches, pivoted and returned fire before Briggs could readjust on the narrow slope. Sawyer dropped without a sound. The bullet pierced his collarbone and lung. Snow around him melted in a widening, steaming patch. Briggs knelt beside him, listening to breaths that came too fast and too thin. He pressed gauze against the wound even as Sawyer whispered, "Did we get him?" Briggs answered yes. He didn't add that they'd lost him in the seconds between shots. Sawyer died 8 minutes later. Briggs folded the young man's hands and removed the harmonica Sawyer carried, giving it to Royce to mail home. Corporal Andrew Fisk, 26, Trenton, New Jersey. Fisk was experienced, steady, the kind of man who wrote letters to his sister every Sunday without fail. On 14 February, during a relocation across a narrow ravine, the squad was ambushed at 38 yards, close enough to see frost on the enemy's sleeves. Briggs dropped the first rifleman cleanly. But his gloves were stiff with cold, and when he shifted to reacquire the second target, the man had already ducked behind a stump. A single shot cracked back. Fisk jerked and fell forward into the snow, face first. Nolan reached him quickly, but the wound just above the heart allowed no time for comfort or hope. That night, Briggs wrote only one line in his notebook: too slow. Private Nolan Reese, 22, Bakersfield, California. Reese crossed a clearing during a pre-dawn reposition on 20 February, the snow crunching under his boots like crushed glass. The moment stretched too thin. Briggs felt something wrong but couldn't see it. Then came movement in the tree line. Briggs fired, missed by inches, fired again, hit. But the second enemy rifleman, concealed lower in the brush, fired once at Reese. Reese fell backward into the drift, arms spread, eyes open. It was over before Briggs even cycled the bolt. Loss upon loss carved something cold into him, not anger but clarity. He didn't mourn loudly, he simply grew stiller. More focused, more determined to close the small, deadly gap between what doctrine demanded and what conditions allowed. The turning point came at 04:18 on 26 February 1945. A morning soaked in fog so dense it clung to eyelashes. The squad was holding a shallow depression between twisted pines when the first sound emerged, a soft, deliberate crunch at mid-slope. Briggs froze. Hargrove, lying beside him with his helmet tilted back, whispered, "You hear that?" What? Briggs nodded once. Movement flickered, shadows within shadows. 2 SS riflemen advancing silently, one higher on the ridge, one lower. They were trained, disciplined, patient. Briggs exhaled and aimed. He fired once. The high rifleman folded, sliding down the snowy incline. But before Briggs could recenter, before he could restabilize, before his fingers responded to thought, the second rifleman swung his weapon toward the depression. Hargrove rose to shift position. A single shot cracked. Briggs remembers the sound differently than the others, slower, deeper, as though time thickened around it. Hargrove staggered back, hand to his ribcage. Blood seeped between his fingers, steaming in the cold. "Royce, get him down," Briggs shouted, dropping to pull pressure bandages from his kit. The fog lit faintly red in the lantern glow. Hargrove looked at Briggs with an expression not of fear but of apology. "Keep him back," he whispered. Briggs held him as breath rattled thinner and thinner. The forest swallowed sound. The wound was too deep, too internal. Within a minute, Hargrove went still. For the first time since joining the army, Briggs felt something break, not outwardly, not visibly, but deep in the machinery of his discipline. This death, more than the others, traced directly to the delay between shots. A delay born not of weakness, but of physical limitation under winter conditions. It was preventable. That night, Briggs opened his notebook and wrote 3 words. "Not rate recovery." The letters pressed deep into the paper as though carved with intent. Briggs approached Lieutenant Barnes first. Barnes stood by the map table, steam from a field heater rising past his face. "Sir," Briggs said, "I'd like permission to try a small modification to my rifle. Nothing internal, just a—" Barnes didn't even look up, denied. Briggs swallowed. "Sir, respectfully, you're not here to redesign army equipment," Barnes snapped. "We have procurement for that. You want better shooting, practice more." Briggs clenched his jaw, saluted, left. 2 days later, during a weapons clinic run by an ordnance captain, Briggs tried again. "It's just a small assist," he explained. "A way to reduce." The captain cut him off. "Soldier, we are not revising manuals because one machinist thinks he's clever." A junior officer chuckled. "Ohio boy wants to rebuild the war." Briggs left without replying, but enlisted men saw the truth. After lights out, Royce leaned close and whispered, "Toolbox, you're onto something. Don't let those paper men stop you." McCluskey added, "You do what you need to. Regulations don't bury our boys, bullets do." Yet official channels remained closed. The army didn't want changes. The forest, however, didn't care. It happened in a drafty barn outside Freudenstadt on a night when wind lashed the walls like ropes. Snow seeped through cracks in the roof, dusting the floor with a thin white veil. The squad had bedded down, their breaths rising in soft plumes. Only Briggs remained awake. He sat at a small work. The barn smells of cold hay, diesel, and the faint sweetness of old grain. The wind rattles its loose slats like a handful of bones. Briggs sits alone at a makeshift bench, the same crate that held rusted nails an hour earlier. A lantern burns low, casting a dim circle of gold onto the battered wood. He unwraps the scrap cloth containing the small piece of metal he has shaped slowly over the past 2 weeks. It is not a weapon. It is not mechanical. It does not alter the rifle in any meaningful way. It is nothing more than an ergonomic sliver, a contour shaped to his hand, his reach, his memories of the toolroom at Republic Steel. His file rasps softly in the quiet. SHHHK, SHHHK, SHHHK. Outside, snow thickens. He breathes through his scarf, warm mist rising and falling like the slow pulse of the barn itself. Royce peers in once during the first week of these late-night sessions. "That looks like nothing, toolbox," he mutters. Briggs nods. Sometimes nothing's enough. Other nights, McCluskey checks on him, shaking his head. "You keep this up and you'll turn that rifle of yours into a religion." But Briggs only works silently, refining angles that matter to no one but him. He slides the tab along his glove, then bare fingers, then the trigger guard, studying how it aligns, whether it guides his muscle memory without resistance. This little piece of metal does not change how the rifle fires. It changes only how he feels the rifle, where his finger rests when he is too cold to sense anything else. When Lieutenant Barnes passes by once, he snorts. "Briggs, if you think that trinket is going to win you any battles, you're in for disappointment." Briggs never replies. He simply wraps the piece in cloth and waits for the next night. Gradually, the tab becomes familiar to his hand, as familiar as the file he used to shape springs in the toolroom. It is a gesture, not an innovation, a memory turned into metal, and it waits in his kit for the day he will need it. The forest becomes his secret workshop. Every night after chow, Briggs slips into the trees with his rifle slung low. The sky is a bruised purple, clouds drifting over a swollen moon, frost crackles underfoot. The temperature drops to 24 degrees F, then 22 degrees F, cold enough that each exhale burns his nostrils. He kneels under a pine and removes his gloves. His fingers sting immediately as he places the rifle into position. He is not firing tonight. The rifle is empty. The world is silent except for the distant rumble of artillery somewhere miles away. He practices raising the rifle to his cheek, lowering it, settling into prone, into a cramped crouch. All the while, the tab guides his trigger finger to the same point, the same contact. He is teaching himself to overcome winter numbness, to live inside the rifle the way machinists live inside their tools. The forest listens. A tree groans under the weight of snow. A fox pads through the underbrush. An owl hoots once, startled by the quiet human figure in camouflage. Briggs repeats movements until sweat freezes in the creases of his gloves. He does not count repetitions. He simply moves, breathes, adjusts. One night he times himself in the fog, lifting, steadying, requiring, settling breath. Not firing, just learning what seconds feel like when danger is close. 5 seconds becomes 4, 4 becomes 3 in a breath. This is not training for speed, it is training for certainty. Certainty that when the forest demands perfection at a moment's notice, he will give it. No one asks what he's doing. They see him return exhausted and pale, and they let him be. On 16 March 1945, at 20:00 hours, the battalion receives word of increased Waffen-SS activity ahead. Patrols, signals, intercepts, flashes of movement in the densest pockets of the Black Forest. A briefing tent crackles with lantern light. Lieutenant Barnes outlines the plan. The squad will occupy a ridge line offering overwatch on an approach trail believed to be an SS patrol route. Briggs is assigned a hide earlier scouted by engineers, a granite crevice halfway up the slope. Expect resistance, Barnes says. They know we're coming. Intelligence places 14 Waffen-SS riflemen within a 2-kilometer radius. Odds of ambush 60%, rising to 80% at dawn. Briggs listens quietly, running numbers in his mind, distances, elevations, likely angles of approach. He studies the map, noting the ridge they will climb before dawn. As he steps away, Barnes eyes the small cloth-wrapped object Briggs tucks into his coat. You still clinging to that little scrap? Yes, sir. Then you'd better hope it doesn't get you killed. Briggs says nothing at 4:30 the next morning. They ascend the ridge through frozen brush. Temperature 28 degrees F, humidity creeping upward, fog pooling in the shallow valleys like smoke. At 05:12, Briggs crawls into the rock crevice. He measures it by instinct, 18 inches wide, 10 inches deep, angle of depression 6 degrees, good enough. He unwraps the small metal tab and affixes it in place, not permanently, not structurally, just aligned where his hand expects it. A point of memory, nothing more. He settles into position, breath slow, hand steady. At 5:42, he hears boots in the snow. The forest holds its breath. Rotten snow compresses under 3 sets of boots at 112 yards. Briggs presses into the rock, feeling cold seep through his coat. Fog drifts in sheets, thinning and thickening like a tide. He sees them, 3 silhouettes gliding between trees, an encirclement team, moving with purpose, sweeping for hidden eyes. Briggs exhales, his cheek touches the stock, the crosshairs settle, the first shot cracks like a snapped icicle. The lead rifleman pitches forward into snow, rifle skidding from his hands. Echo rolls through the trees in long, hollow waves. Birds erupt upward, startled. The remaining 2 figures dive for cover. The forest wakes. Return fire shatters the crevice. Bullets chip stone above Briggs' head, spraying grit into his eyes. A fragment slices his cheek, warm blood trickling down into his collar. He doesn't flinch, rifle up, adjust left. The second rifleman fires blind into the rocks. Muzzle flash briefly illuminates the mist. Briggs forces a breath, steady and cold. He shifts within his narrow shelter, feet braced, shoulders locked. Downslope, his squad still sleeps. They have no idea. Fog curls like gray smoke. The small tab under Briggs' trigger finger feels familiar, like the groove on a well-used wrench. It guides the numbness, not the shot, a memory of pressure more than a tool. He sights the second rifleman, now at 76 yards, moving laterally through mist. Briggs inhales once, slow, exhales, squeezes. The rifleman drops sideways, sliding against a pine trunk. Snow falls from branches in a soft rush. The forest erupts. 7 more Waffen-SS riflemen break from the tree line, advancing cautiously up the slope. They do not shout, they communicate with curt gestures. Briggs notes distances instinctively, 102 yards, 94, 81. Bullets bite into the rock lip above him. One ricochets, whining like a struck wire. His heartbeat thuds, slow and heavy in his ears. He fires again, miss. Fog swallowed the shot's intention. The enemy ducks. They spread out in a fan shape, classic envelopment maneuver. Briggs adjusts position by inches, cold stone digging into his ribs. Breath turns white, then invisible as adrenaline heats his core. He counts targets, 7 remaining. Their spacing tightens as they near the ridge. A rifleman steps into faint illumination at 64 yards, lifting his weapon. Briggs fires, the man crumples, knees folding first. Another dives behind a fallen log. Briggs pivots, barely enough room in the crevice, feels the cold bite deeper into his gloves. The fog thickens, turning the world into shifting gray curtains. A sudden flicker of motion at 35 yards too close. A flanker. Briggs snaps the rifle left. He doesn't think. His muscles know the motion before his mind does. He fires. The echo is painfully loud at this range. The flanker collapses mid-stride, rolling into a drift. Branches sway as more bullets strike the rocks around Briggs. His cheek burns from the earlier stone fragment. His breath trembles. Still he steadies. The remaining riflemen reconsider. 7 men advancing has become 3, then 2, now 1. The last of them retreats downslope, firing blind to cover his escape. Briggs tracks him through fog, 102 yards, then 118, then 130. He squeezes once more. The final rifleman falls hard, snow pluming around his body. Silence returns abruptly like a curtain dropping. Briggs waits 30 seconds, scanning breath shallow. The forest holds still. No further movement. It is over. Snow settles gently on the ridge, covering footprints, covering fear. Briggs lowers the rifle, his hands trembling from cold and shock. Blood still oozes from the cut on his cheek, warm against the freezing air. He inhales, and for the first time since the engagement began, his breath comes fast, almost ragged. At 5:52 he hears shouting from below, boots crunching snow. Royce, McCluskey, and the others scramble up the slope, rifles at the ready. "Briggs," Royce calls out, panting, "You all right?" Briggs nods, "I'm fine." They scan the bodies scattered along the ridge, the trail of fallen silhouettes half covered in frost. 7, McCluskey mutters in disbelief. "You dropped 7. Briggs doesn't answer. He wipes his cheek, wincing at the sting. His breath fogs in heavy bursts. Barnes arrives last, staring at the scene with a strange mixture of irritation and awe. His gaze drifts to Briggs' rifle, then the small metal tab still resting discreetly under his glove. He opens his mouth, perhaps to scold, perhaps to question, but no words come. Instead he turns away. "Pack up," he orders the squad. "We're moving." Royce smirks. "Boss didn't say thank you." Briggs shrugs. "Didn't expect him to." But as they descend the ridge, whispers travel faster than the wind. A lone sniper, 7 enemy riflemen. Fog so thick you could choke on it. Something about a little metal piece on his rifle. A machinist from Ohio who didn't brag, didn't boast, just did what he had to. By midday, half the regiment is talking about the man in the rock crevice. By nightfall, even passing supply clerks ask, "You hear what Briggs pulled off?" He never explains the tab. He never claims it mattered. He just cleans his rifle, wraps it in its old cloth, and settles by the fire, quiet as he's always been. The forest still remembers its echoes, and so do the men. By 6:20 on 17 March 1945, word had already begun to travel downslope. The squad spoke in low, disbelieving tones as they gathered around Briggs' crevice, staring at the 7 bodies arranged across the ridge like punctuation marks in the snow. The forest seemed to hold its breath again, not from fear but from acknowledgement. Private Royce said it first, half-whispered. He held the whole ridge. By the time they returned to the temporary bivouac site, the rumor had outrun them. Soldiers turned with raised brows as Briggs passed, some curious, some skeptical, others quietly impressed. There were no cheers, no applause. Such things felt wrong amid snow and silence, but murmurs drifted like smoke between tents. Briggs, the machinist. He dropped 7 alone. Something about a grip trick, don't know the details. By noon, a few enlisted men approached him discreetly, rifles slung loosely at their sides. "Corporal," one asked, rubbing gloved hands together, "is it true you've got some kind of, what do you call it, field guide on your rifle?" Briggs looked at the young man, then at the line of rifles leaning in the snow. "It's nothing special," he said, "just a reminder for my hand. It doesn't change the weapon, just how I settle on it." They nodded, not fully understanding but respecting the boundary. No one asked him to replicate it. No one asked him to teach them. They simply wanted to touch the idea. Whatever quiet ingenuity had allowed one man to hold a ridge during a fog-thick dawn. The story moved outward from platoon to company, then to adjacent battalions. Soldiers tended to share stories of small miracles, not the kind decorated with medals, but the ones shaped by grit, nerve, and a worker's instinct to keep the machine running. By sundown, the name Briggs circulated through the 3rd Infantry Division like a small current, steady, unflashy, but impossible to ignore. The impact wasn't dramatic in the way newspapers preferred. There were no sweeping victories, no decisive breakthroughs traced to that single morning, but subtle changes appeared in the unit's behavior over the next 2 weeks. The squad's immediate casualty rate on patrols dropped from its previous 13% average to about 10%, a modest shift on paper, but meaningful in the cold calculus of winter fighting. Even Lieutenant Barnes, who usually discounted such numbers, noted in a quiet moment, "The forest seems less costly these days." Nearby units, hearing of Briggs' engagement, took a different sort of interest. Some informal training circles began emphasizing trigger hand awareness, not modifications, simple principles of relaxation, grip consistency, and finger placement under stress. NCOs called it Briggs discipline, though Briggs himself never used the term. In small unit engagements across the wooded ridges, reports described sharper performance during sudden encounters. Nothing miraculous, just a 12–18% improvement in quick response accuracy where seconds mattered. Weather patterns, enemy posture, and terrain played major roles. No one credited one man. Still, the story lingered in the margins of after-action write-ups. Statistics never fully capture fear, cold, or instinct, but Briggs' quiet contribution nudged the line of numbers in a direction more favorable to survival. Even if unofficial, even if subtle, it mattered, and to Briggs that was enough. Army bureaucracy reacted exactly as Briggs expected, with caution, distance, and a faint hint of irritation. Lieutenant Barnes filed a short report describing the encounter. Sniper engagement resulted in 7 enemy KIA. Corporal Briggs acted with initiative and composure. No mention of the tab, no mention of innovation. Official records rarely honor the small truths of survival. Later that day, an ordnance officer visited Briggs' position, looking the rifle over with a squint. "You didn't alter the firing mechanism." "No, sir." "What? You didn't change tolerances, springs, or sears?" "No, sir." The officer nodded, unsatisfied but unable to object. "What you did isn't standard. Don't encourage others." "What?" Briggs nodded once, as if agreeing, though he hadn't encouraged anyone. 2 days later, the battalion circulated a reminder: unauthorized equipment modifications are prohibited. It made no mention of Briggs, but the timing spoke clearly. Officers kept their distance. Enlisted men kept their respect. In an unmarked supply ledger, a clerk wrote, "Noted. Soldier initiative may contribute to improved performance under winter conditions." It was as close to recognition as Briggs ever received from the Army. The Waffen-SS, though battered and retreating, were quick learners. Captured radio intercepts indicated confusion about the failed encirclement attempt. Patrol leaders speculated they had stumbled into a secondary Allied position or triggered an unseen crossfire. They rarely attributed large effects to single shooters. Such acknowledgments were considered dangerous to morale, but they adjusted. In the week following the engagement, Allied reconnaissance observed. Flanking teams took wider arcs 70–90 yards farther. Advanced scouts moved in pairs, not alone. Encirclement attempts reduced sharply in frequency in the immediate sector. Patrols slowed their approach to suspected hide sites, probing with grenades rather than silent observation. In a forest where every inch of caution was paid in blood, Briggs had forced an experienced Waffen-SS detachment to rethink their tactics. He never knew this, he never asked, but the forest changed around him. Nolan Briggs left Europe in October 1945 aboard a troopship that creaked in the Atlantic swells, the war fading behind him like a worn photograph. He stepped onto the platform at Canton Union Station on a chilly morning, the air thick with the familiar scent of coal and wet iron. His parents met him by the old clock, their aging hands trembling as they held his. They saw no medals, only the same quiet boy they had raised beside the mill's shadow. He carried a duffel bag, a rifle case, and nothing else. After 2 weeks of readjusting to civilian rhythm, sleeping without artillery, eating without haste, he returned to Republic steel. The foreman recognized him immediately. "Briggs, you looking for your old bench?" "Yes," Nolan said softly. "We kept it open, some men you don't replace." He resumed work shaping springs, filing levers, aligning dies. The rhythm returned, steady as breath. The factory, with its heat and clang and sparks, felt more honest than war. The machines asked only for care, never blood. He never sought attention for what happened in the Black Forest. When neighbors asked about his service, he spoke of friends, not numbers. When the local paper requested an interview, he declined politely. In a small drawer in his toolbox, wrapped in the same oilcloth that carried it through France and Germany, he kept the little metal tab. He did not mount it on a plaque, he did not polish it. He simply preserved it, a reminder of the men whose names he wrote on a folded scrap of paper tucked beside it: Delmont, Fisk, Reese, Hargrove. Sometimes, on cold mornings, he ran his finger over the cloth and whispered a quiet greeting to them. Royce visited him once a year, bringing strong coffee and stories from Wisconsin. McCluskey sent postcards written in crooked handwriting. Barnes he never saw again. Life settled into its quiet places, shift whistles, dinner plates, the turning of seasons. Briggs never remarried, never moved far from where the mill's hum vibrated through the ground. Some men needed distance from the war, Briggs only needed work. His actions never reached textbooks. No official doctrine cited him. No general traced a line of tactical evolution to a machinist's idea in the snow. But legacy rarely lives in manuals, it lives in habits. In the months after 1945, NCOs who heard the story began coaching recruits on the importance of finger indexing, cold weather trigger discipline, and muscle memory in gloves.